one, and we're live. Hello and welcome. Welcome to Diverse Conversations with Ashka Patel. And today it is an absolute honor and a pleasure to host none other than Mr. Paul Day, who is an Executive Director of the Pharmacist Defence Association. This is the Pharmacy Defence Association in the UK is the only independent trade union exclusively for pharmacists and the largest pharmacist membership organization in the UK. The PDA, or Pharmacist Defence Association Union, exists to represent, defend, and support the interests of members, either individually or collectively in terms of their terms and conditions in dealing with employees and or outside organizations. For many years, a small number of powerful organizations have influenced the direction of the pharmacy profession. The union seeks to address this imbalance and to act as an enabler for employees and locums to reassert their professional autonomy. So it is my great pleasure, Paul. Thank you so much for making the time to join us on this conversation today. I cannot thank you enough because the insights that you'll be providing us today will be so relevant as the topic of a pharmacy union has always been something of an interest, especially for our listeners here in Canada. And, to learn from somebody who is, experiencing this day in and day out will provide us with such incredible insights. I cannot look forward to our conversation. But before that, I would really appreciate if it gives a brief introduction about yourself and, just what you do at the PDA and, tell us a bit more about PDA.
Sure. Okay. So I'll start briefly with myself. As you say, I'm the executive director. So I manage or lead the union, reporting to our chairman. How I got involved in this sort of work, I'm not a pharmacist, is I guess early in my career, I was the sort of person where colleagues came to me and said, Paul, you know that issue that everyone is talking about and, we're not happy. You're not scared of the management. Will you go and have a word with the management and be our spokesperson? And I worked in the head office of a retail bank here in the UK. I did that. I was all right at doing it. I ended up getting elected on my local region of my union, on the national executive of the union, and then at one point became the national chairman of the union, where I then negotiated the pay for sort of 30-odd thousand banking workers. Wow. as well as representing them, that sort of thing. And alongside that, I've developed similar skills. I'm like a councillor in my local town, and I've been involved in community groups quite a lot. So with that combination, I eventually about almost 20 years ago had the opportunity to stop doing that just as a hobby, I guess, almost, but aside to having a full-time job, and actually got a full-time job in that not-for-profit sector. So I'm kind of a leader of not-for-profit organizations, particularly trade unions.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. And with that said, it's always, given the extensive experience you bring, just from not-for-profit organizations, but also, kind of advocating for employees and, working with employers to, establish better working conditions and be it whatever the concerns are of that matter. What exactly intrigues me and makes me curious is the Pharmacist Defence Association in itself, in terms of how did the association come into existence, and what is the story behind the formation of the union that was formed as part of the association?
Yeah, absolutely. So a few generations ago, as it still is in some European countries and elsewhere around the world, to run a pharmacy you have to be a pharmacist.
Right.
And, virtually every pharmacist is their own boss. So yes, you didn't need a trade union, because what you needed was organisations which pharmacies could work collectively, for sure. But there wasn't a relationship between an employed pharmacist and an employee. It just didn't exist. Today, however, most pharmacists are employed or locums, so, temporary, doing contract work. And so there was a gap where conditions had developed, but there wasn't anybody speaking for individual pharmacists. And how we were actually formed, and And we're unusual as a trade union here in the UK because most unions are over 100 years old, or at least can trace their history that far back. We're only 13 years old as a union. And what happened was about almost 20 years ago, in fact, our chairman was Mark, was on the board of the regulator in the UK. And of course, they dealt with issues of practice and discipline and what have you. And there was a tragic case which involved the death of a baby where there was a dispensing error. Tragedy. But it was clear from the circumstances that the employer held some liability because there was a trainee pharmacist who shouldn't really have been in that branch. The supervising pharmacist had only qualified a year before. The circumstances weren't right. And yet the two individuals, the trainee and the newly qualified pharmacist, were taking the full responsibility in law for this tragedy. And the employer none, it appeared. And so because of those circumstances, we looked at, or Mark looked at, developing a defence union, which is what the doctors have here. It may be called something else in Canada, I'm not sure, but on indemnity cases, to say if there is an indemnity claim from a patient, or from, in the case of a death, the patient's family, who is protecting you? Because you can rely on your employer's indemnity, but in the case I'm talking about, the employer's indemnity said you two should take the blame, because of course that indemnity organisation worked for the employer. And said, well, actually, like the doctors have these medical defence unions, which are these indemnity organisations. They pay in, it creates a fund, it's insurance, it creates a fund, and then if there is a claim, there's professionals to help defend the professional, and sure enough, compensation can be paid if there was fault. But we're very aware that, if the indemnifier gets to a point where if we argue this, it will be the employer's fault, but if we argue that, it will be your fault. But the indemnifier works for the employer, they're never going to say it's that way. So we did that and created that. But actually, very quickly, it became apparent that whilst that was a very helpful thing, most issues pharmacists had at work was actually down to their employment. And for many of them, this friction between them as a clinical health professional trying to care for patients and their employers, who are private businesses trying to create profit for shareholders. And what the employers said was, well, under UK law, you can come and help somebody with a disciplinary, but only if you're a trade union, and you're not a trade union. So you can't come in, you can't represent these people. So what Mark and colleagues did, was also create the PDA union. So we're kind of we're technically two registered organisations, but we're one team. And so we have the union side and the Defence Association side. And in fact, if you are talking about a patient death here, worst case scenario, a pharmacist could find themselves in front of the coroner, who will want to know why someone's died. Fair enough. On a disciplinary, because their employer could be saying, well, you've broken the rules, we're going to discipline you. The police could be in to say, this is an offence, you've killed someone under the Human Medicines Act. On a fitness to practice in front of the regulator, who of course as an ultimate sanction could take away their right to practice, and have the family on an indemnity claim. And we're able to cover all of those points for a pharmacist. So on all of those fronts, the PDA would help one of our members defend themselves in that case.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I think it's always great to understand, because it's unfortunate that, it was a patient death which led to the formation. But at the same time, I think we all are firm believers in knowing that every incident teaches us something, and, that led to the formation and the creation of the Pharmacist Defense Association. For an outsider like myself, who's not very familiar with the UK regulation framework around the profession, what would be the difference? Because you did allude to this a little earlier as well, that the Pharmacist Defense Association is itself an entity, and then the union itself is an entity, but they work together. So what are the differences, and like where do they kind of work together? Like if you can just allude to that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, although we have two registrations, I'm sure the Disney Corporation is technically
Yes.
multiple organisations. We're one entity in people's minds, and basically we have through the PDA we have the relationship through with insurance brokers and through to the underwriters that provide the insurance side of stuff, and through the trade union side we're regulated by the UK government regulator of trade unions, which gives us legal protection. It is in the UK, as in many countries, illegal to discriminate against someone because they're a trade union representative, similar to if you discriminated against someone because they're pregnant or because they're of their ethnicity or whatever. So you've got that status and the rights and responsibilities of being a trade union.
Okay, fair enough. And then my next question would be, so who's represented by the union? Who gets to be a part of the union?
Yeah, so in the UK, there's around 60,000 registered pharmacists now. Population's 65 million-ish.
Wow.
But there's about 60,000 pharmacists. But of course, some of those are owners. So that we don't have a conflict of interest, we wouldn't let someone who is an employer of other pharmacists be a member. And similarly, if you were a senior director, we of course have, the largest employer of pharmacists here is Boots or Walgreens in a sort of North American context. If you were a senior director of Walgreens, but also a pharmacist, you wouldn't be able to join us. So we manage that conflict, but pretty much most employed or locum pharmacists, well, all locums, but most employed and locum pharmacists could join us. We also take undergrads. So once you've started your pharmacy course at university, master's degree course here, you can join us. Although our investment in the youth is that we let them join us for free. So as a 4-year master's degree undergrad, and then as a 1 year as a trainee pharmacist, the membership is free, because it's interesting, the youngsters don't often perceive the sort of challenges they might find in a workplace, because by definition most of them have never worked anywhere before.
Exactly. Exactly. And I guess I'm not sure if pharmacy technicians are a regulated profession within the UK or not, but if would they be considered, or pharmacy support staff that work in a pharmacy, would they be able to join the union?
Yeah, so the UK has 2 regulators. Great Britain, which is Scotland, Wales and England, has 1, which is the General Pharmaceutical Council. And in Northern Ireland, it's the Pharmaceutical Society of Northern Ireland. Britain does regulate technicians. Northern Ireland does not regulate technicians.
Oh dear.
but actually we don't take technicians. Again, you can cut a union in many ways. You could say we were just the English pharmacists or just the community pharmacists, whatever. The way we've cut it is to say we are all pharmacists. So in hospitals, in prisons, community, health boards, wherever anyone is practicing as a pharmacist, if you're employed or locum, you can join us across the UK. But I mean, some of our members in Northern Ireland, for example, might also work in Ireland. Which is of course a different country, and we don't cover them there. So our cut is anywhere in the UK, but pharmacist or studying to become a pharmacist.
Okay, thank you for that. And so what is usually the process for a pharmacist to join the union? Like, what do the membership costs look like to join the union?
Yeah, okay. So to join, I mean, it's simply an online application process. It's an insurance claim, so they have to declare if they have any history, because the underwriters need to be prepared to take them on risk. So history of claims, that sort of thing. But of course, most people are accepted because most people don't have a worrying history of claims. So you sign up, you join. Because of the insurance side, the price is done on risk. So if you're a community pharmacist, it's significantly less than £200 a year. And in fact, we also this last year got agreement from the revenue here, the tax people, the government, to say because you need indemnity cover to practice, you can get tax relief on it. So for most pharmacists will be paying 40% tax on all their earnings, excuse my cat. So you can reclaim a lot of that money anyway. So that's the cost. I mean, if you are the most high risk, independently prescribing medicines, diagnosing, it could run to about £1,500 a year. But because of our history, that's for the PDA side.
Right.
The union membership is technically free because we said we're adding that as a service. Should the insurance not be prepared to take you, which is rare but possible, or if for some reason you just, which I would not understand why anyone would think like this, but if someone sort of said, oh no, I don't want the insurance side, you can join the union direct for £240, which is a similar price for unions looking after professional people of our member sort of status.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing that. And I think before I jump into the next phase of our conversation, it's always great to wrap up my understanding and just making sure that I'm getting this right. But it seems like it's incredible, the work, and just trying to bring this back home in terms of the landscape we have here for pharmacists especially. So we have an association which is advocating for pharmacists. We are able to get our liability insurance from them or through any other insurer who's providing it. So what it seems like is that the association and the union in the UK, they kind of work collaboratively to provide that one-point stop for pharmacists to say, hey, here we are for you, as long as you are an employee and as long as you are locum, and you do not have any business interest in any pharmacy establishments, then we are able to cover you. Got it. Thank you. And so with that said, how does the union collaborate with other organizations, associations, unions, networks? Like I was researching a bit before to prepare for our talk, and I do have come to an understanding that there's quite a few trade unions in the UK, especially for healthcare providers, with the physicians and other healthcare practitioners. So how does a union collaborate within pharmacy, outside of pharmacy, to enhance the practice of pharmacy?
Well, I mean, it's in terms of trade unions, we collaborate around the world as well as in the UK. And the world of trade unions, I say to colleagues that join us, it's not like a brand of commercial interest says, oh, how you've done great commercials, can you tell us who you use for your commercials? And then one of their competition, Pepsi and Coke, aren't going to phone each other and help each other. I mean, trade unions, we're all part of a global family, really. So I'll take a call from a union in any other country, and they'll take a call from me, pretty much. So we're able to talk to people right around the globe. We're actually part of a federation of European country pharmacist trade unions, and we collaborate on that. And through COVID, for example, we're able to have regular check-in calls where, how is Croatia dealing with pharmacy in the pandemic and in lockdown? How is France dealing with it? How is Austria dealing with it? And exchange experiences and opinions. And so that's really, really helpful. I mean, it depends on topics. So, for example, I said, for example, technicians can't join our union, but we would encourage them to join the appropriate union, which in this country would really be the shop workers union. So we and they, for example, have jointly worked on stopping abuse in retail establishments, violence, harassment, sort of bad behaviour by patients there. With the other healthcare unions, and you're right, there's a nurses union, a doctors union, a podiatrist union, a physiotherapist union, etc.
Yes.
We're all representing people in the NHS, National Health Service here, so we work collaborating on those things. But topic by topic, we form coalitions with all sorts of people. I mean, it's also interesting. As I say, I'm not from a pharmacy background, but I am from a trade union background. And one of the things which has been different for me working for my first healthcare union is, every decision that we make starts from the place of what does it mean for the patient?
Right.
When I worked for a banking union, it wasn't that we didn't like customers or anything, but we didn't start from a place that said, well, what does it mean from customers? But we start always from what does this mean for patients? So, you know, we also work sometimes with patient organisations because we've got, you know, we want, you know, and don't get me wrong, there is nothing wrong with shareholders of companies wanting to make profit. That is the world we live in, and you know, directors of companies are duty bound to maximise profit for shareholders. You know, we're not trying to bring down capitalism or anything.
Definitely.
Yeah, but you know, but we put patients first, and so sometimes we're aligned with the patient organisations and not aligned with the employers of our members.
That is very interesting, and with that in a chain of thought, I think it's you know, would there be any achievements or highlights? I'm certain that there's many, especially during this pandemic, where we have all had to kind of think at the drop of the hat to, you know, change and make sure that our profession is and our professionals are well protected, and you know, have the tools and resources to serve our patients. Any achievements or highlights that you wish to share with the listeners today?
Well, I mean, around the pandemic, I mean, it was one of the most intense periods of my working life. You know, our members were on the front line dealing with patients, and particularly for community pharmacies. And again, talking to colleagues around the world, you know, even in the most strict of lockdowns, sources of food and sources of medicines had to stay open, right?
Yes, exactly.
So, hospitals cancelled. I mean, you know, on the one hand, hospitals were dealing with COVID patients, you know, and our members, as well as other health professionals, daily seeing people die, horrific. Not dismissing that, but for other treatment and other procedures, they were able to sort of close down to a degree. And doctors' practices were able to reduce patient contacts and sort of go virtually, whereas community pharmacies were open. And so we saw something like a 40 or 50% increase in volume.
Wow.
Patients arriving because they couldn't go to the doctors or the A&E. Everything was closed to them pretty much. So, you know, the volume's really there. Violence and abuse became massive. And we engaged around, so again, not getting too technical, around the UK, there's various police commissioners that are responsible. So we engaged the police commissioners and the police forces to say, you need to check on these pharmacies and make sure people are okay. Because the volumes, and we got that on the national television as well, because members said, we surveyed members and they said, you know, it was something like, how often do you see an incident of abuse? Well, maybe every 4 weeks or something. You know, how often do you see it at the minute? Oh, every day. It was that dramatic.
Wow.
But even at the very beginning, of course, the lockdown started when we actually had proper lockdown. It was, you know, you shouldn't be out of your house. And for a lot of the community pharmacists, they were saying, well, I'm trying to go out and I'm getting stopped. And so we did an online thing for our members. We said, type in and you can download a printable PDF that says, I am a pharmacist. I am a key worker. You have to let me go. And we did that within about, it was something like 48 or 72 hours of the first lockdown. Members said, but we can't get out, you know? So we did that. And again, with the vaccinations, when the vaccinations started, the process was, the government said, right, we want health workers to get priority vaccination. Good. So we'll say to you, community pharmacy employers, we'll say to all employers, NHS and community, give us a list of your employees and we'll get them on the list for vaccination. And of course, we said, well, hang on, what about the locums? So we created a portal on our website where locums could say, look, I'm a locum, I'm working on the front line, I need my vaccination. And then we pass that information onto their regional NHS, their regional sort of health sector contact to get them their vaccination. So we do lots of practical stuff like that. It's not all negotiating for more pay and you know, more benefits, that sort of stuff. We're very practical in our support because we're about improving the working lives, including practice, of our members. So, you know, whatever needs doing, we'll get involved in.
For sure. And that sounds really great because, and I think just something that I wish to share from, like, you know, something that we faced, especially early on in the pandemic here in Canada, you know, so there was a rush to, you know, kind of say essential healthcare workers or essential healthcare providers. And like, you know, we would have our major grocery retailers that were open. So just like in UK here as well, it was mostly just grocery stores and, you know, pharmacies that were open at one point during the pandemic. And, you know, there would be a thing saying essential healthcare workers would get a priority because they're working and all of that. But for some odd reason, pharmacists were never considered an essential healthcare worker. So, the association, at least in my province in Ontario, they had to work to get that established. There was a lot of grassroots movement from pharmacists. And I think having that unified voice, that definitely helps, bring that point home a lot more louder than just grassroots effort. Grassroots efforts are great because they get the conversation started, but to see it to come to fruition, I think obviously we need a more structured approach, which is where associations and unions come into play. With that said, any challenges or concerns, like what kind of challenges or the concerns usually will the union address? So you did allude to some of them, like working conditions, and for example, during the pandemic, like you mentioned about including locums into vaccination. Like, what are some other challenges or concerns that you'll be representing your members for?
Well, I mean, the crux of it is patient safety and the ability to practice, fully. And also, I think if we didn't exist, there is a chance that decision makers, politicians and other decision makers would talk to Walgreens and think that was the voice of pharmacists. And, Walgreens is the voice of Walgreens shareholders. Right. So we're making sure the voice of pharmacists on anything, really. So we recently now, I've lost track of time in this pandemic, a year and a half ago, we launched 4 equality networks. So we prevented a 100-year-old women's pharmacist association from folding. Wow. Brought that into our family. So we're now also the National Association of Women Pharmacists, and set up an LGBT network, a Black, Asian and minority ethnic pharmacist network, and what we call the Ability Network for disabled pharmacists. And so, we're inputting into challenging, for example, the curriculum for the students, because the classic example is people saying every skin disorder I've ever seen has only been shown on white skin. Yes. So how am I supposed to care for patients who are not white if I've never seen a condition on non-white skin? Things like that. Right. So those are sort of practical issues. For the regulator here, there is a fitness to practice if you are alleged to have done something wrong in terms of practice, as I say. And statistically, basically, if you're white, you're you've got a higher chance of being a member of the panel making the judgment, but less of a chance of being in front of the panel having had a complaint about you. Now, maybe the complaint thing is about the propensity for patients to complain about people. Maybe there is sort of inherent structural racism in the behaviour of patients complaining. That's not the fault of the regulator, but for the regulator at large, they have worked, and we're trying to work with them to help make sure that their panels are more representative of the workforce. And and I guess, like in most places, pharmacy in the UK now is 66% women. Whereas obviously the population is about 51%, so there's an over-representation, and we're about 40% ethnic minority, so non-white, which is a big jump from where we are kind of as a nation. So we're trying to make sure that everybody, old white men included, but make sure everyone gets an equal shout of things, and that representation takes place. But that's through the curriculum. I mean, some of the challenges are kind of workplace challenges, where people put targets ahead of what's realistic. People saying, I'm under huge stress, I can't cope, my mental health is suffering, and the manager's not not listening. And in some of the larger corporations we deal with, but not just there, you're talking about people that are experienced in retail management come in and manage a pharmacist. They don't understand about healthcare. Yes. But even one of our biggest payouts we got for one of our members was a pharmacist who was autistic and had practiced for I think 20 odd years, got a new manager in a hospital trust. This is a public employee. Got a new manager who set targets that they knew that they would fail to meet because of their autism, and basically set them up to fail They lost their job. They ended up having to work as a porter in the same hospital. But 3 years later, with our support, they won their case, and the payment was the compensation, which was, compensation for lost salary, was
Right.
over £200,000.
Wow. But and obviously, like, it's great in a sense that, this member of the union was able to get their due rights, especially if, the dismissal happened under the wrong circumstances, right? And that's always, it's always important. I think it's always an intricate detail, and I'm certain that you can't answer this in its entirety. But what are some matters or challenges that would that, let's say, if a member brings to the union but are not considered appropriate for the union to represent? Or have you ever come across something like that?
I mean, yeah, and the thing of having worked for trade unions for decades is, if it can happen, I've probably seen it.
Yes.
I mean, we're not, there are some places where people come to us for advice and we give them advice, but we don't get involved.
Right.
Because, it depends. You might be unhappy with how your employer has dealt with you, but it's not a kind of legal breach, and it's not. So we'll give people counsel and advice and help them resolve it. And sometimes it is not obvious to others that we've been involved at all, because it's in a private conversation. We've helped them. Sometimes people will write to their manager and say, I've spoken to my union and therefore blah blah blah, and they'll get an answer that way because the mention of us.
Yes.
But I mean, we don't cover every single. I'm trying to think in terms of issues. Or some of our members will be managers and say to us, I'm trying to do this, and we say, well, look, we're not providing you HR support.
Exactly.
Your HR support needs to come from the company, not from us. But I mean, also prevention. We often say, as a pharmacist organisation, we understand prevention is better than cure. And through our casework, where we have, reactively helped people where things go wrong, we're able, as that voice, and we've got 32,000 members now, we're able to kind of proactively prevent things going wrong through information, through lobbying, through talking to politicians and the regulator and the educators, who sometimes don't realise the pressure is there. Whatever that pressure might be, and we can be that the canary down the mine in that we see ththings going wrong earlier often than the regulator, because we go, hang on, people are coming to us with this sort of query, there's something up here. And there's currently all sorts of challenges, because regulation is having to catch up with technology.
Yes,
and
big time.
Large internet-based pharmacies need to be regulated in the same way. And as I say, everything that we do starts with patient safety. So we're concerned, our members are concerned that they are run safely. So we've got those sorts of challenges that are happening that we'll get involved in. We don't necessarily have to get involved in an individual case to raise concerns. So yeah, but I mean, there's all sorts, anything that can happen will happen if you're dealing with 30,000 people.
For sure. And I mean, this is again, just coming as a newbie to this whole idea of trade unions. It's always a question that intrigues me, and it's thank you so much for sharing that, because I completely understand that it's very individualized as well, because it really depends on the circumstances and what exactly is the background or the story behind the situation that's being presented to you. So I obviously it will be dependent on those factors. And I think you have alluded to this as well, with the emerging of technology and especially creeping into pharmacy sector and healthcare sector at large. I think that's a new age of pharmacy moving forward. How does the association and the union foresee the profession as we look to the future? What are some challenges that you're currently working on, or that you can talk about?
Yeah, and so we have quite an active policy department. So the regulator and government are forever consulting on new regulation, on new practices around pharmacy, around GP practice, around provision of healthcare in general, and we'll comment on those and be part of those conversations, because we're a major player in the world of pharmacy. now. In terms of how we see pharmacy, it has to be seen in the context that there is a shortage of doctors,
Yes.
and there is a huge number of doctors on the edge of retirement.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the country's health system needs to make more of pharmacy. And, you know, we're clear that, you know, a community pharmacy is the most accessible part of the health system. Even if you're not registered with a doctor, you can walk in without an appointment and see a clinical health professional in the heart of your community. Now, some of the challenges, and again, I say we work globally. I was talking to an American pharmacist last week. Some of the challenges are, my employer is expecting me to run the dispensary and give vaccinations all day simultaneously. Can't really do that. Can't do it safely. And, you know, we see a world where actually pharmacies should be invested in more by the government to make up.
Yes.
It will actually save them money, not just because prevention, but pharmacists are cheaper than doctors to employ. You know, make more of the community pharmacy, drive more traffic to community pharmacists, where it used to be, where you would, you know, instinctively go to your pharmacist as a first port of call.
Mm-hmm.
And there you should have access to not just medicines, but services and support also. You know, and in a world, you know, we push for, you know, many of our community pharmacies is one pharmacist trying to juggle all that stuff. We'd see a world where actually you have one pharmacist safely dispensing medicines, dealing with queries, another pharmacist in that consultation room, de-prescribing, talking to medicine, you know, doing a medicines review,
Yes.
you know, doing, you know, within their competency. I hate to be bad. We're not trying to make pharmacists into pretend doctors. You know, doing within their competency basic conditions and concerns of a patient, and things like smoking cessation, right, and, you know, obesity and all that sort of stuff, which helps with kind of population health and public health initiatives, mm-hmm, which saves the country money, keeps people at work, adding to the gross domestic product to the country, and, you know, makes the world a better place, sort of thing. So we see pharmacists in that place. Of course, the big challenge is that some of where we're dominated by large corporations that want to see pharmacy as a retail transaction, where, you know, people come in and say, and we did some surveying some years ago and said, when do you get frustrated with a doctor? Well, if he asks me to move on in less than 10 minutes, because I want to tell him or her, you know, my condition. When do you get frustrated with a pharmacist? If it takes more than 2 minutes to hand me the box.
Yes.
What's the problem? What, they're just handing me a box. What's the problem? And of course, you know, part of the education we're doing is saying, actually, this is a health professional making sure what's in the box doesn't kill you, and actually, you know, is adding value. But where some larger corporations, particularly if they also own the wholesaler, and so their profits are about shifting the most number of boxes overall, there is that conflict. And where they're trying to be a retailer and to, as I say, make the provision of medicines into a transaction rather than part of patient care, there is that challenge to that view. But, you know, that's why part of what we do is educate politicians and decision makers and the public about the value of a pharmacist. But as I say, we're not just community pharmacy, also pharmacists in hospitals, you know, on COVID wards, in oncology departments and everywhere else that they're practicing.
Exactly. And it's critical, I think, because, you know, we need to, as pharmacists, you know, as a pharmacist myself, like, we need to step away from this whole image that has been created about a pharmacist being the pill pusher, right? Like, you know, the typical picture that comes into mind when you talk of a pharmacist to the general public is somebody counting pills, and we have come so far away from that in terms of not just far away, but it's more so like we have added on so many more scopes of practices that allow us to, you know, contribute to our patients' health and well-being, but I think it just needs to translate into policy, which I think the work that you're doing is incredible for that. And I think I'm just going to wrap up this interview with my one last question for you is, you know, how do you describe the future of pharmacy for pharmacists? And again, it's a loaded question, but at the same time, who better than you to ask this, since your members are pharmacists? And you know, I would love to hear your insights on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think for the reasons I've just said, really, full of potential. If, you know, if the government makes the right decisions, because ultimately they fund what goes on, right? You know, they control the high street. full of potential. And you know, the initial education and training now is so the cohort who are starting now will become pharmacists in 5 years, will all be independently prescribing.
Right.
You know, so you know, the opportunity to invest in the profession as a country and as a world is there. So there's real opportunity for the profession to develop. And here in the UK, there's been a push of recent years that you have more pharmacists working alongside general practitioners in the doctor's surgeries as well as being in the hospitals. That's really been a growth area, which has been more clinical, and you've got pharmacists more spending more time with patients, interventions, as I say, you know, looking at medicines reviews, but you know, helping patients get the most out of their medicines. So I think it's full of potential. And from our point of view, we've already got about half of the profession in membership, and we keep growing. Excuse me. If you know, as we build our voice, the voice of pharmacists gets louder. Yes. And so there's the opportunity to make sure things end up well.
Thank you so much, Paul. Those were some great insights to wrap up this conversation, because I couldn't agree more with you. I am also a firm believer that the practice of pharmacy and the profession for pharmacists, the future is very bright. It's very collaborative, and I think we just need to be open to embracing new scopes of practices and being able to advocate for ourselves, and making sure that we're part of associations who are able to support our voice and bring it to the forefront to politicians and lawmakers. Thank you so much for the incredible work you do, and thank you for sharing such great insights. I am certain that this is a great learning experience for all of us. Again, as I said, like in Canada, we do not have a union, but we do have associations, and this is something definitely for us to ponder and think about, and kind of see where do we go next from here. So thank you so much for making the time. I know it's a little late on your UK time, but thank you for squeezing me in today. I appreciate it.
That's right. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you. And thank you to all viewers as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And thank you once again, Paul. And thank you everyone for tuning in today. And with that, we're going to wrap up our conversation for today. Stay tuned for the next one. Bye-bye.